TO plays.
Hey, this is Tio bringing you another Kerbal Space Program video. This time I thought I would do something a little different. I know there's a lot of casual players out there, and if you happen to get the chance to play Kerbal, you might not have as much time to dedicate to figuring things out and doing things from scratch. So for some folks, Sandbox is the way to play, and thankfully Sandbox comes with a lot of pre-made vehicles. So I thought it might be a good idea to demo how you would take one of those vehicles and actually put it in orbit, do some fun things with it. So I've already perused through the ships that you get with the game. There's a bunch of good ones. A lot of interesting designs, unique shapes. Obviously, they're not all um, designed for utility. Some of them have extra parts just for aesthetics or theme, but they all fly. And what I like about them is in the description, it kind of explains the purpose. So I thought I would start with the Kerbal X vehicle. Um, Reason being, number one, it looks like it's plenty powerful to get into orbit around Kerbin. Looks like it can go much further than that. And also, because of its size, looks like you could swap the top section out for a different payload. So this looks like a lander. Obviously, it's got legs and an engine, but separately, the command module would pop off so you could re-enter Kerbin's atmosphere if you wanted to come back to Kerbin after whatever mission you were doing. So you could take this whole top stage off and build a payload. And there are some pre-saved payloads in here, like uh, space station parts. You could probably swap some of those and put them on top of this rocket, and it would launch just fine, I would imagine. So let's grab our group: Jeb, Bill, and Bob. Let's see. Yep, yeah. Engineer, scientist, and pilot. Let's put in Valentina just to change things up. I believe Valentina was added later after the game's development initial release. Originally, Jeb, Bill, and Bob were the three Kerbals you start with, but Valentina is considered one of the original four crew now. Let's use her. Flag. Let's use my TO flag. That's it. You don't have to change anything on the vehicle. Obviously, everything would be staged correctly. So, didn't even need to change the pilot if I didn't want to. Could have left all that. While we wait, spacebar is the hotkey for staging. So if I were to hit the spacebar right now, it would activate the engines and detach these launch stability enhancers. However, if I hit the spacebar right now, because I'm not throttled, my rocket would just fall to the ground. So first key I'm going to hit is T, which turns on my SAS, my stability assist. I could also just manually click SAS. And because of the level of my pilot, he's a 5-star. I'm sorry, she is a 5-star pilot. I've got a whole lot of stability assist options, which we'll talk about later. But the only one I need to leave on right now is stability assist, which just means wherever the vehicle is currently headed, the pilot's going to attempt to keep it in that heading, which is handy. And next is the throttle. So I guess you could actually click the throttle. So the hotkeys for that: Z would be to throttle up all the way. X would be to throttle down all the way. Shift is incremental, throttle up, and control is incremental, throttle down. So typically when I get to the launch pad, I hit T for SAS, Z for throttle up, and then I'm ready to launch. The third setting I would also like to use is the maneuver mode. That's to give you some useful data. Instead of having to open your map like this and find your vessel and your flight path, all the information you really need is going to be in this area here. So let's get started and I'll explain it as we fly. So I'm going to leave the vessel pointed perfectly straight so we get at least to 100 meters per second. Then I'm going to start turning right. That's the direction of the spin of the planet. And it saves me, I think, about 300 meters per second. Two of my engines have already run out of fuel, so I'm going to ditch them. Kerbal X is designed with that asparagus staging. So the next two engines are going to run out of fuel. Yep, there they go. Ditch those. It's important to ditch while you're pointed in the prograde marker, because if I'm too far outside of the prograde marker, those boosters could hit my rocket as they fall. So I'm just going to keep tilting to the right. As you start to see this wind resistance hitting the craft, it's a good idea to slow down, but I've just lost all my boosters, so I'm actually going to naturally start to not ascend so quickly. keep tilting to the right, not getting too far away from the prograde marker. If I tilt too far, vehicles are going to start to spin out of control. So I'm starting to look at my apoapsis. I don't want to climb too quickly because I want to be gaining some speed. 70,000 is the top of the atmosphere. So anything close to 70 while I'm still going this slow is I'm actually starting to waste some energy. So let me throttle down a little bit. I'm going to keep turning. This is called a gravity turn, where you're trying to get horizontal just as you're getting to the thinner parts of the atmosphere. Okay, my apoapsis is already above 70, so I'm actually just going to cut off my engine. So that wasn't a very efficient maneuver, but I'm headed towards 80,000 meters, well above the atmosphere. And by the time I get there, look, my speed is starting to drop. You can imagine if you threw a baseball, it would naturally start to slow down as it got to the top of its trajectory. So when I get to 81,000 feet, I'm going to be going the slowest, and then I would start to pick up speed as I fall back down to the planet. But right before I get to 81,000 meters, I'm going to turn my engine back on and use the rest of the fuel in this core stage to circularize my orbit. So I only need to be going about 2,300 meters per second to circularize, and I've got 2,000 meters per second left in this core stage on top of my current speed. So I'll be able to get into orbit just with the core, which is why I was saying earlier I thought this is a good example vehicle, because technically the payload could be full of no fuel, and it could just be science equipment or a lab or something like that, and you can get it into orbit just fine just by using the core stage and its boosters. So one trick I'm going to use, I want to start tilting my craft in the direction that it's moving. So I'm going to click on the prograde marker, and you see the craft is starting to turn. Valentina, my pilot, is turning it until it gets into the middle of the prograde marker, and then she's going to hold it there. She's going to continue to hold it there. So as we get to the top of our trajectory to the apoapsis, I'm going to start to throttle up. I imagine this mainsail engine's got an awful lot of thrust, so you don't want to wait until it gets to 0 seconds, because then you're starting to descend. But with a really high thrust engine, you can get pretty close to 0. Look how fast I'm speeding up. So that needs to get up to 2,300 meters per second. Another thing to look at, you don't want your apoapsis to get too far away, because that just means the top of your orbit's getting further and further, and you're not burning as efficiently. So right now I'm very close to the top of my orbit. That's the perfect place to burn. It's a bad place to burn if your burn's going to be very long. So if I have to burn for 2 or 3 minutes, I should have started it a minute and a half ago. But this was a really quick burn. So now I'm looking at my periapsis. When that gets above 70,000, I'm in orbit. And because I let it burn a little too quickly, it also raised my apoapsis. But so if we go to the map, so periapsis is the lowest part of the orbit. Once that's above 70, that means you're in orbit. So it's at 77. That's good. I've got 7,000 meters to spare. My apoapsis is the highest part of the orbit, and that's 102 meters, 102,000 meters. So not a perfectly circular orbit, but I will stay in this orbit forever unless I change my speed, or yeah, unless I change my speed. So that's the tutorial for how to get into orbit. There's probably some other ones out there that might explain it in more scientific detail, but that's the gist of it. Some things that can go wrong, like I mentioned before, is turning too sharply, not turning sharp enough so that when you get to the top of your orbit and you're ready to circularize, you're going way too slow. Again, this Kerbal X, this rocket's designed really well for thrust and for putting the payload in orbit. So I had plenty of fuel. That mainsail is pretty strong considering how small the rocket is. This is a good vehicle to fly. It was easy to get into orbit. It was very forgiving. Sometimes if your thrust is too low, that last circularization takes a little longer, and then you end up getting back down towards the atmosphere, and it can get a little messy. But all in all, a relatively clean launch. And just for shits and giggles, let's see. We're gonna separate. So I just hit the space bar again and activated the next stage, which was this engine decoupler. It's an interesting way to attach it. All right. And then if I hit the stage again, it's going to activate this poodle engine. I'm going to throttle up. And all I'm doing is raising my apoapsis. Whenever you burn your engine near the periapsis, it raises the apoapsis, and vice versa. And if I would burn retrograde, which is the opposite direction that I'm traveling, so right now I'm obviously moving in this direction. You can see the planet, that's the way I'm headed. If I click on the retrograde marker, it's going to lower my apoapsis because I'm at periapsis. So let's lower it and see what happens. Got a lot of fuel in this stage, an awful lot of fuel. Okay, now my apoapsis is actually into the atmosphere. Lower it even further. The thicker part of the atmosphere starts around 20 to 30,000 meters. So anytime you're looking to re-enter the atmosphere, depending on how fast you're going, that's a pretty good range to shoot for. So when I get to the other side of the planet, I'm entering the atmosphere, I'm not going to need my engine anymore, so I can actually ditch it now. I did probably ditch a lot of the other accessories like batteries and stuff, but I don't really need any batteries. I've got plenty of charge, so let's speed up time. This is how you get out of orbit. So once you enter the atmosphere at 70,000 meters, your time speed cuts off, and you can speed it up again, but this time it's only giving you the option to speed it up ×4, whereas before it gave you the option to speed it up a whole lot more than that. So I'm gonna go ahead and speed up time. This is a really aerodynamic craft. My pilot's holding it at retrograde, so I don't have to do anything. It's gonna land itself practically. The only thing I'll need to do once we get to the lower part of the atmosphere is I will have to just deploy the parachute myself. I could actually do it now. There, I just hit the space bar. The parachute is deployed, and you can see that by this option to disarm it. It's not physically deployed because the deploy conditions have not been met. So the minimum pressure is greater than 4.04, and my altitude is way higher than 1,000 meters. So all I've done is say, hey, when it gets to 1,000 meters and that pressure, you can go ahead and release the parachute. So it'll do that on its own. All right, well, I'll go ahead and speed the rest up. As always, I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, please hit that like button or leave a comment. I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you next time.